after the HOA illegally built 47 homes on my grandfather's land and threatened me when I fought back. I watched as nature delivered the justice that corrupt officials wouldn't. What would you do if the people stealing your inheritance suddenly needed your help to survive? I never thought I'd have to fight for land that was already mine. My grandfather's final gift to me was 200 acres of beautiful forest land, stretching from the old creek all the way to the mountain ridge. He'd protected it for 60 years, and now it was my turn. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday. I was checking fence lines when I spotted bright orange stakes hammered into the ground near my eastern border. They formed neat rows and squares, like someone was planning to build something big. My stomach knotted as I followed the stakes deeper into what was definitely my property. "Excuse me, you're trespassing." The sharp voice cut through the quiet forest. A woman with expensive sunglasses and perfectly styled blonde hair marched toward me. Even though I was on my own land, she moved like she owned the place. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. I'm Jack Foster. This is my property." I kept my voice calm, though my hands were shaking. She laughed, but it wasn't friendly. "I'm Karen Wilson, president of the Pinecrest Homeowners Association, and according to our surveys, this land is part of our new development project." She handed me a glossy brochure showing pictures of fancy houses with perfect lawns. The title read, "Pinecrest Estates, 47 luxury homes coming soon." "There must be some mix-up," I said, pointing to the stakes. "These markers are almost half a mile inside my property line." Karen's smile disappeared. "Our paperwork says differently. The board has already approved construction to begin next week." She glanced at her watch impatiently. "If you have concerns, you can attend our meeting on Friday, but I wouldn't bother. Everything's been legally settled." As if on cue, the rumble of heavy machinery echoed through the trees. Over Karen's shoulder, I spotted yellow bulldozers crashing through the underbrush, knocking down trees that had stood for 100 years. "Stop them!" I shouted, running toward the machines. "This is private property." Karen grabbed my arm. Her nails dug into my skin. "I wouldn't make a scene if I were you. Our association has very powerful lawyers." I pulled away from her grip and watched helplessly as the bulldozers continued their destruction. A tall man in a hard hat approached us. "Problem here, Mrs. Wilson?" he asked, completely ignoring me. "No problem, Mr. Rodriguez. Just explaining our expansion to the neighbor." She emphasized the word neighbor like it was something dirty. "I have deeds and surveys," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations." Karen's phone buzzed. She checked it and smiled. "Send in the rest of the equipment," she said to someone on the other end. Then she turned back to me. "Our lawyers say differently. Board's already approved everything." As more trucks rumbled into view, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Posted on trees throughout the property were red fire warning signs. We were in the 3rd year of a terrible drought, and the forest was dangerously dry. "You can't clear land during fire season," I said. "It's against county regulations." Karen's smile never faltered. "We have special permits. Again, feel free to check with the county office." She turned and walked toward her shiny SUV parked on a newly cleared patch of my land. That afternoon, I drove into town. My grandfather's property maps spread across the passenger seat. The county records office was small but organized. Marge, who'd worked there for 30 years, greeted me with a smile that faded when I explained why I was there. "Jack, I was wondering when you'd come in," she said quietly. "There's something strange going on with your property records." She pulled up the digital files on her computer. What I saw made no sense. According to the official records, nearly half my land now belonged to Pinecrest Estates. "This is wrong," I said, spreading out my grandfather's maps. "Here's the original survey from 1958. And the updated one from when he added the north section in 1972. Marge compared them, her forehead wrinkled with concern. "These don't match our current records. The boundary lines were updated 3 months ago." "Updated? By who?" "I never approved any changes." She lowered her voice. The request came through Judge Pearson's office. Karen Wilson's brother-in-law. My hands started shaking again, but now with anger instead of fear. That's illegal. Marge nodded. I thought it was odd, but everything had the right signatures. I'm sorry, Jack. On my drive home, I noticed new Pinecrest Estate signs already posted along the main road. How long had they been planning this? I called every lawyer in the county. None would take my case. Can't go against the Wilsons, one finally admitted. They practically own this town. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on my porch, watching headlights move through my forest as more equipment arrived. My neighbor Tom's truck pulled up around midnight. Heard about the trouble, he said, joining me on the porch. Brought you something. He handed me a file folder. Inside were photos of Karen meeting with county officials, passing envelopes under tables. What is this? Tom sighed. Been gathering evidence for months. The HOA is nearly bankrupt. They need this expansion to stay afloat. Karen's been bribing officials, changing records. Why are you showing me this? Because you're not the first. 3 years ago, they took the Johnson place the same way. Old man Johnson fought them in court and lost everything. Died broke and homeless. A chill ran down my spine. What happened to his land? Tom pointed to the lights in the distance. Phase 1 of Pinecrest Estates, built right over his family cemetery. As the bulldozers continued their midnight work, I spotted something that made me sit up straight. The workers were removing the fire warning signs, tossing them into a trash pile. They're ignoring the fire danger, I whispered. Tom nodded grimly. Karen told the board that fire regulations were cutting into profits. They've got some inspector on payroll to look the other way. In the distance, heat lightning flashed over the dry mountains. The summer had been the hottest on record, and there hadn't been rain in almost 2 months. What am I going to do? I asked, more to myself than to Tom. He handed me a business card. My cousin works for the state fire marshal's office. Not under Wilson's thumb. Yet. As he drove away, I looked at the card, then at the lightning flashing closer now. The wind carried the smell of fresh-cut timber and hot machinery oil from where they were clearing land in the darkness. What would happen if a fire started in these conditions, with all those safety regulations ignored? My hands shook as I placed the old property maps on the county clerk's desk. Mrs. Jenkins, who had worked there since I was a kid, looked confused when comparing them to the computer records. This can't be right, she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. According to our system, you only own 10 acres, not 200. But I remember your grandfather's land. Something's very wrong here. I felt sick. When was this changed? She typed quickly, her face growing pale. 3 months ago, right after Mayor Williams' son joined the Planning Commission. The same day your property line changed, Sunset Valley HOA filed permits for 47 new homes. The office door opened. Karen Wilson walked in wearing an expensive suit, stopping cold when she saw me. Her fake smile appeared immediately. Researching your little problem? So sad when people don't keep proper records. She turned to Mrs. Jenkins. I need those construction approval forms signed today. Mrs. Jenkins looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. Actually, I found some irregularities, which can wait for the proper channels, Karen interrupted. I'd hate for budget cuts to affect longtime employees first. The threat hung in the air as Karen collected her papers and left. Mrs. Jenkins gripped my arm. Be careful. She's connected to everyone who matters in this town. Rain pounded my truck as I drove to Tom's place. He'd been my grandfather's friend for 30 years and owned the land next to mine. His face darkened when I showed him the altered records. Come inside, he said, checking over his shoulder before closing the door. This isn't something we should discuss where people might hear. Tom's kitchen smelled like coffee and wood smoke. His wife Lisa served us whiskey with shaking hands. They came after us first, Tom admitted. Offered to buy our 5 acres for half what it's worth. When we refused, strange things started happening. Lisa nodded. Our dogs got sick. Someone cut our fence. Our mail disappeared. Tom leaned forward. Last month, I overheard Karen talking to investors at the diner. The HOA is broke. They need this expansion to stay alive. They've got people's retirement funds tied up in it. But why my land? There's empty space on the other side of town. Your property has the natural spring and the best views, Lisa explained. Premium lots sell for triple. I swallowed hard. But changing official records? That's illegal. Tom's eyes were sad. Karen's brother-in-law works at the tax assessor's office. Her cousin is the police chief. Her college roommate is Judge Harris's wife. My stomach dropped. So I have no chance. I didn't say that, Tom replied, pulling out his phone. I've been recording their meetings secretly for months. Karen bribed officials with HOA funds. I was waiting for someone brave enough to fight back. Hope flickered as Tom played a recording of Karen discussing adjusting boundaries and making problems disappear. But when headlights swept across the windows, he quickly hid his phone. They watch my house, he whispered. Be smart. Get a lawyer from the city, not locally. The next morning, I called every lawyer within 50 miles. None would take my case. By afternoon, I understood why. An official-looking notice hung on my cabin door. Citation for code violations. Apparently, my grandfather's cabin, which had stood for 60 years, suddenly broke 17 different HOA rules. The fine was $500 per day until fixed. I crumpled the paper, only to find Karen watching from her shiny SUV parked at my gate. Problems? She called out sweetly. The board meets Thursday if you want to appeal. Though with your reputation, I wouldn't expect much sympathy. What reputation? Oh, everyone knows your family never really owned all this land. Your grandfather took advantage during the record office fire in '62. We're just correcting a historical mistake. My blood boiled. That's a lie. Prove it. She smirked. The original documents burned, remember? Such a shame you'll have to move. We're thinking of putting the community pool right where your eyesore cabin sits. That night I couldn't sleep. Construction equipment appeared at dawn. Workers putting up stakes along what used to be my eastern field. When I confronted them, they showed permits with yesterday's date. Back home, my garden looked strange. The tomato plants had wilted overnight, the soil giving off a chemical smell. My water tasted funny too. Tests confirmed someone had poisoned both. Desperate, I drove to the newspaper office in the next town. The editor, Ms. Rodriguez, reviewed my evidence with serious eyes. This is definitely newsworthy, but I need solid proof before publishing. Karen's husband owns our parent company. Later, neighbors I'd known my whole life crossed the street to avoid me. At the grocery store, the cashier refused my money. We don't serve troublemakers, she said. Only Tom still spoke to me, though now only through burner phones. They're threatening my job, he admitted. But I'm still collecting evidence. That evening, watching through binoculars, I saw HOA members drinking champagne exactly where my property line used to be. They raised glasses toward my cabin, laughing. When I tried to shower that night, only brown sludge came out. My water line had been cut, the well access mysteriously damaged. The repair company couldn't come for 2 weeks. Suddenly, they were very busy. I sat on my porch in darkness, looking at old photos of Grandpa teaching me to fish in our creek. The same creek now marked for community drainage. He'd fought in 2 wars and kept this land through the Great Depression. What would he have done? The answer came when I found his hidden lockbox beneath the floorboards. Inside lay the original property deeds, surveys from 1925, and something unexpected, letters between Grandpa and Mayor Williams' father discussing the true boundaries, signed and notarized. Just as dawn broke, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. They're coming for your cabin tomorrow. Demolition scheduled. Karen told the crew you've already been evicted. What will you do? My phone buzzed at 6 a.m. I can't represent you anymore, my lawyer said, his voice shaking. Someone left dead animals on my porch with a note saying I should back off your case. I sat up in bed, my stomach tight with anger. They're threatening you? We need to call the police. Already did. They took a report, but without proof. His voice trailed off. I'm sorry. I have kids. After hanging up, I stood at my cabin window watching the sun light up what used to be my forest. Now half of it was dirt piles and concrete foundations. I needed a new plan. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office and asked for historical aerial photos of my property. The clerk, an older woman named Marge, recognized my name. "Your grandfather's land case? Everyone's talking about it," she whispered, glancing around. "Be careful who you trust here. Some records went missing last month." My hands shook as I spread the photos across my kitchen table. The boundary lines were clear. The HOA had stolen nearly 100 acres. I called 5 more lawyers. None would take my case. Fine. If legal help wouldn't work, I'd protect what I had left. I drove to the hardware store and bought security cameras, motion sensors, and bright lights. Tom, my only friendly neighbor, helped me set everything up around my remaining property. "Karen's been bragging about how they'll own everything up to your front porch by Christmas," Tom said, connecting wires. "My wife heard her at the grocery store saying you'd eventually give up." "Never," I promised, testing a camera. "This land has been in my family for generations." That night, my new security system caught 3 HOA board members placing stakes 10 feet closer to my cabin. I saved the footage and waited. The next day, I printed flyers with photos of my property boundaries and proof of the altered records. I placed them on every mailbox in the development, including a QR code linking to county records showing the real property lines. Karen appeared at my door less than an hour later, her face red with fury. "Remove those lies immediately," she demanded, jabbing her finger toward my chest. I held up my phone, recording. "I'm just sharing public records, Karen. We have permits. We have approvals. Based on fake boundaries," I replied calmly. "Want to explain how that happened?" She stormed off, phone already at her ear. That evening, my water stopped working. When I checked the well, someone had damaged the pump. The repair would cost thousands I didn't have. I borrowed Tom's truck and filled containers at the public spring, enough for a few days. When I returned, 3 police cars were parked outside my cabin. "We received noise complaints," the officer explained, looking uncomfortable, "and reports of threatening behavior." I showed him my cameras. "I haven't left my property today except for water. Someone damaged my well." He nodded slowly. "File a report. But be advised, we've received multiple complaints about you." After the police left, I checked my cameras again. Karen's son Jason and another man had approached my well while I was gone. The footage wasn't clear enough to prove sabotage, but their timing was suspicious. The HOA scheduled an emergency meeting the next evening. I decided to attend, bringing printouts of my evidence and Tom as a witness. The community center buzzed with whispers when I walked in. Karen sat at the head table with 4 other board members, all wearing matching blue jackets with the HOA logo. "You're not a member," Karen announced when I tried to speak. "You have no right to address this board." "I'm a directly affected party," I replied, holding up my documents. "You've built on my land, altered county records, and now you're harassing me." Murmurs spread through the room. Some residents looked confused. "We have proper permits," Karen insisted, her voice rising. "This development was fully approved. Based on falsified boundaries," I said, passing out my evidence to nearby residents. "The original survey markers were moved." Karen's face darkened. "Security, please remove this person." 2 men approached me. Tom stood up. "I've seen the original property maps too," he announced. "They don't match what the HOA submitted." Karen banged her gavel. "You're outnumbered, outspent, and unwanted here. Accidents happen to stubborn people who don't know when to give up." The room fell silent. Several residents looked shocked at her threat. "Did everyone hear that?" I asked loudly. "That sounded like a threat. On camera." I pointed to my phone recording on the table. The meeting dissolved into chaos. I walked out with Tom, feeling eyes on my back. The next morning, construction crews arrived earlier than usual, with equipment I hadn't seen before. They began clearing the thick brush around my cabin, the natural fire barrier that had protected the property for decades. I confronted the foreman. That brush is on my property. It's a fire break. Orders from above, he shrugged. Environmental cleanup. A forest ranger truck pulled up. I recognized Ranger Davis, who'd known my grandfather. What's happening here? She asked, looking concerned. HOA ordered brush clearing, the foreman explained. Ranger Davis shook her head. We just issued extreme fire danger warnings for this valley. You need these natural breaks intact. Take it up with the HOA, he replied, walking back to his crew. Later that afternoon, Tom's wife Maria knocked on my door, her face pale. I work at the Emergency Services Dispatch Center, she said, stepping inside. Karen came in today to meet with the fire chief. I overheard them talking about response protocols. My stomach dropped. And she convinced him to prioritize the new development in case of fire. Said the older properties like yours were lost causes with outdated construction. They've mapped out defense lines that exclude your cabin completely. I stared at her in disbelief. They're planning to let my place burn if there's a fire? Maria nodded. Karen reminded him about the department's new trucks the HOA helped fund last year. That night I couldn't sleep. Outside my window, the bulldozers kept working under floodlights, cutting down more trees, removing more brush. The natural protection my grandfather had carefully maintained was disappearing hour by hour. My phone pinged with a weather alert. Extreme fire conditions expected to worsen over the coming weeks. No rain in the forecast. Record high temperatures. I looked at the construction spreading across what used to be my land, at the dried grass and exposed soil where protective vegetation had been removed, and at the single narrow road now clogged with construction vehicles. Something had to change. I needed more than cameras and flyers now. I needed to show everyone exactly what Karen and the HOA were risking with their illegal development. And I knew exactly how to do it. My hands shook as I snapped pictures of what used to be my forest. 3 months had passed, and I barely recognized the land my grandfather left me. Where tall pines once stood, cookie-cutter houses now lined freshly paved streets. The HOA had named it Wilson Estates, after Karen herself. Disgusting, isn't it? Tom appeared beside me at my fence line. His face looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. They work day and night. My wife hasn't slept in weeks because of the noise. I nodded, too angry for words. Across the property line, workers in hard hats installed identical mailboxes, while others planted tiny trees that would take decades to match what they destroyed. Karen's telling everyone you're mentally unstable, Tom whispered. Says you've been threatening construction workers. I know that's a lie, but people are scared of you now. That explained why the local store clerk had refused to sell me supplies yesterday. My stomach tightened as I realized how isolated I'd become. Back at my cabin, I found fresh tire tracks cutting across my garden. The vegetables I'd planted were crushed beyond saving. This wasn't the first time. Last week someone had spray-painted "sell" on my front door. Before that, my chicken's coop had been broken into, leaving the gate open. I'd spent hours searching the woods to recover them. The phone rang, my last remaining friend at the county records office. I shouldn't be telling you this, she whispered. But they've redirected the seasonal creek. The environmental impact study was faked. They claimed it was just a drainage ditch. I grabbed my camera and hiked to the north edge of my property where the creek had flowed for generations. Sure enough, concrete barriers now forced the water away from its natural path, directly toward my cabin. The first heavy rain would wash away my foundation. When I called the Environmental Protection Office, the receptionist said, "Oh, you're that property owner," and transferred me to voicemail. That afternoon, I recorded video of the erosion beginning at the edge of my property and posted it online. Within hours, I received messages from environmental activists offering support. For the first time in months, I felt less alone. Karen must have seen my post. She appeared at my door that evening with 2 HOA board members, all wearing matching polo shirts with the Wilson Estates logo. "Your little internet stunt needs to stop," she said, not bothering with hello. "You're hurting property values with lies." "The creek redirection is illegal," I replied, staying calm though my heart raced. The water will destroy my home when it rains. Perhaps you should have accepted our very generous offer. Karen smiled coldly. Unfortunate things happen to properties that aren't properly maintained. Is that a threat? I asked, recording our conversation with my phone visible in my shirt pocket. Karen's smile faltered. It's a fact. Your grandfather's old cabin is an eyesore. The board has voted to increase fines for properties that don't meet community standards. I'm not part of your community, I reminded her. You're surrounded by it, one of the board members said. Eventually you'll have no choice. After they left, I reinforced my doors with new locks. The activists I'd connected with online helped me install security cameras covering my entire property. We documented everything: the water diversion, the trespassing, the property damage. 2 days later, I drove to town for supplies. As I loaded bags into my truck, Karen's son Tyler and 2 friends circled me in the parking lot. My mom says you're causing trouble, Tyler said, tossing an empty soda can at my feet. I ignored him, continuing to load groceries. Hey, I'm talking to you. Tyler shoved my shoulder. There are cameras everywhere, I said quietly. Think carefully about what you're doing. Tyler laughed, then kicked my truck's taillight, shattering it. His friends high-fived him as they walked away. When I reported it to the sheriff, he reviewed the store's security footage. Can't see who did it clearly, he said, though Tyler's face was perfectly visible. Boys will be boys. You got insurance, right? That night, I called the local news station. A young reporter hungry for stories agreed to meet me. She interviewed Tom and 3 other neighbors who'd sold their land under pressure. We showed her the altered property records, the illegal creek diversion, and the environmental damage. This could make a powerful story, she said, eyes wide. But the station manager plays golf with Karen's husband. I'll try, but no promises. The story never aired. The following week brought record heat. Signs warning of extreme fire danger appeared throughout the county. I watched from my porch as HOA landscapers cleared brush around the new houses but ignored the dangerous dry undergrowth piling up along my property line. Fire inspectors coming tomorrow, Tom told me over our shared fence. Karen told everyone he'll only check the new development, not the problem properties like yours. That evening, I discovered my water pressure had dropped to almost nothing. The construction had damaged the well that had served my family for generations. When I confronted the construction foreman, he shrugged. Not our problem. Maybe upgrade your systems to modern standards. I returned home to find an official-looking envelope wedged in my door. Inside were foreclosure papers citing property tax discrepancies from 1972 before I was even born. According to these documents, my grandfather had underpaid taxes for a single year, and with penalties and interest, I now owed $47,000, due within 30 days. My lawyer called it legally questionable but technically possible. Fighting it would cost almost as much as the alleged debt. That night, as temperatures reached record highs, I sat on my porch watching the sunset turn the sky blood red. In the distance, emergency sirens wailed. A voice on my weather radio warned of dry lightning strikes in the canyons 10 miles west. I looked across at the new houses with their perfect lawns and no fire breaks. Karen had built her dream development, but she'd ignored the most important rule of building in wildfire country. As the wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of smoke, I wondered if nature might deliver the justice that people had failed to provide. Lightning split the sky with a crack that shook my cabin windows. I jumped from bed, heart racing. Something felt different about this storm. No rain followed the thunder, just dry lightning strikes hitting the parched hills one after another. Perfect fire weather. I grabbed my binoculars and watched from my porch as the first orange glow appeared on the ridge above my property. This wasn't a small brush fire. It was spreading fast, feeding on the dry vegetation that hadn't seen rain in months. My phone buzzed with emergency alerts. Mandatory evacuation. Wildfire approaching. I should have felt scared, but a strange calm washed over me instead. Grandfather's stories about fire seasons echoed in my mind. I pulled his worn leather journal from my bookshelf and flipped to the pages marked with pressed wildflowers. His handwriting, still clear after decades, mapped out the natural pathways fire took through this valley. I'd studied these patterns for years, which is why I built my cabin where I did, protected by rock formations and natural fire breaks. Headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness as cars streamed away from the HOA development. Their fancy houses sat directly in the path grandfather had marked as nature's chimney, a wind tunnel that funneled fire straight down from the ridge. I packed essentials methodically, important documents, family photos, grandfather's journal. Unlike the panicked exodus from the development, I had time. My emergency bag had been ready since the day construction started. The rumble of fire engines grew louder, but they weren't coming toward my property. Through binoculars, I watched them form a line around the new houses, exactly where Karen had boasted they would prioritize protection. A frantic pounding at my door startled me. Karen stood there, hair wild, designer clothes replaced by hastily thrown-on sweats. The entitled confidence that usually radiated from her was gone. "Why aren't you evacuating?" she demanded, pushing past me into my cabin. "The fire department says we have less than an hour before it reaches us." "I'm almost ready to go," I said, continuing to pack calmly. "But I'm surprised to see you here. Shouldn't you be with your neighbors?" Her face crumpled. "The fire crews can't save all the homes. They're focusing on the north section, but our street." Her voice broke. "They said our houses aren't defensible." I nodded, feeling no joy in her distress despite everything she'd done. "Fire doesn't care about property lines or HOA rules, Karen. You have to help us." She grabbed my arm. "You've lived here forever. You must know something we don't." I gently removed her hand and opened grandfather's journal to a map he'd drawn. "See these arrows? They show wind patterns during fire season. And this shaded area? That's where your homes are built." Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You knew this would happen. I tried to tell your developers. Sent certified letters warning about building in a natural fire corridor. Showed them historical fire maps." I closed the journal. They called me a crazy old-timer trying to stop progress. Karen's phone rang, her husband reporting that flames were visible from their backyard. When she hung up, tears streaked her face. "Why didn't you fight harder to stop us?" she whispered. "I did fight. For 3 years. You falsified documents, bribed officials, and poisoned my garden. You threatened me when I brought evidence to county meetings." Through the window, the sky glowed orange. The fire was cresting the hill, moving faster than predicted. "There has to be something we can do," Karen pleaded. "Our life savings are in that house." I handed her a USB drive. "This contains all the documentation of what your HOA did. The altered property lines, the bribes, the environmental report you buried showing this was a high-risk fire zone." She stared at it. "Why give this to me now?" "Because after tonight, you'll need it for the insurance investigation. Your board approved construction without proper fire safety measures. Those houses were never going to survive wildfire season." My phone buzzed again. The evacuation order now included the final holdout areas. "Time to go." "I'm leaving, Karen. You should too." "We'll rebuild," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe, but not on my land." Outside, ash fell like gray snow. The expensive landscaping around the development, non-native plants chosen for looks rather than fire resistance, was already beginning to smoke. Karen followed me to my truck. "This isn't over. Once the fire passes." "Once the fire passes," I interrupted. "Investigators will find evidence of everything your HOA did wrong. The altered surveys, the ignored environmental studies, the bribed officials." Her face hardened. "You can't prove any of that." I pointed to the ridge where the flames danced closer. "I won't have to. Nature keeps her own records." The fire had reached the first line of new houses now. Despite firefighters' efforts, the homes ignited one after another. They'd been built too close together, with cedar shake roofs that caught embers like matchsticks. As I climbed into my truck, Karen grabbed the door. "You could have warned us about the fire path." "I sent warnings to every homeowner. Check your spam folder." I started the engine. "Your HOA returned them all marked solicitation," Return to sender. I drove away watching through my rearview mirror as Karen stood in my driveway, the glow of her burning neighborhood reflecting in the tears on her face. The fire wouldn't reach my cabin. Grandfather had built wisely, but her dream of expanding the HOA empire was turning to ash behind me. At the evacuation center, Tom found me sitting alone with Grandfather's journal. Did you hear? All 47 houses are gone. And mine, I asked, though I already knew. Standing perfect, like the fire just went around it. He shook his head in wonder. People are calling it a miracle. Not a miracle, I said quietly. Just respect for the land. As night fell, I watched emergency vehicles race past. Karen's son pointed at me from across the room, whispering to a fire marshal. I knew what was coming next. Accusations, investigations, blame. But unlike them, I had truth and time on my side. The question wasn't if I would get my land back now, but what would rise from the ashes when I did.